What is my opening day roster projection for 2025? We'll get to it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The username on that is at JOHNYJ_15. And you can always find this podcast on wherever you listen to your podcast. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, really wherever you choose to. And we also are on YouTube, so just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If this is your first time tuning into an episode, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. A little bit of background on me. Do lots of stuff over there, but when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Well, as we know and are fully aware, the Royals pitchers and catchers reported today. Also, a couple other position players are there because there is no rule against some of those guys showing up. The Royals Twitter account put out some great video, the sounds of baseball, if you will, of guys taking BP, guys playing catch. Baseball is almost here. We've said that in nearly every single episode so far. It gets you excited. And for what the expectation is of this team going into 2025, it should get you excited just to see baseball being played again. And I know for a lot of Kansas Cityans out there, and don't have to be from this area, can certainly just be fans of the Chiefs, it's been a rough week so far because Chiefs football is now over. They got whooped up on in the Super Bowl. Certainly wasn't very pleased about that. I had to do the post-game show over at 8:10 after the game, so you can imagine that was not a very fun post-game show to do. But for me, all focus now is on baseball. That's the way I usually prefer it. I love putting 100% of my attention to baseball, even if it's just a bunch of guys playing catch today and we get video of that. I'm quite okay with that because it signals to me we're just a few weeks away from seeing this team take the field at Kauffman Stadium against the Cleveland Guardians. But with this almost being the ceremonial kickoff, if you will, of getting baseball content, seeing these guys in uniforms, seeing the sport being played, period, it's a good time maybe to go over my current opening day roster projection. It's always something that it gets people going. It gets people excited because you've got your opinions as well. I've got mine. I would say so far, none of these picks are going to really surprise you. I'm going off of some guys with options and some guys that are out of them. I'm going over some of the new guys that got brought in, but I'll give a pretty firm breakdown for each player with the exception of a few that are just obvious. Cough, cough, Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, Vinny Pasquantino. We all know those guys are making the roster. We all know those guys are going to be getting the majority of the starts in 2025. So I'll begin it with the lineup that I have, and I have these guys playing at this exact position. This is where I have them in the order. This isn't just throwing names out there and then you piece it together. This is what I expect the opening day roster lineup to look like. But as I said yesterday, as I said on Monday, I'm still holding out hope that another bat is brought in. I'm just not sold that the three outfielders that started last year are going to be the three outfielders on opening day. I just have this sense that something is going to be worked out between now and maybe the first part of camp. But the lineup I have here, the starting lineup, if you will, goes Jonathan India at second base. So maybe that leads us to our first question. Why Jonathan India over Michael Massey at second base? I'll be clear, Michael Massey's still in my lineup, but Jonathan India to me is more of an established second baseman than Michael Massey is, and you went out to acquire Jonathan India. And to me, you're probably more willing to move the guy that was already at second base when you're bringing in somebody who has better offensive numbers, has only played at that position. I know Michael Massey's done the same thing, But it comes down to Jonathan India's a little bit more established as a big leaguer than Michael Massey. And don't get it twisted. Michael Massey's my breakout candidate for 2025. I just don't see it being as an everyday second baseman. I see him moving around just a little bit more than Jonathan India. In the 2-hole, no surprise here, Bobby Witt Jr. at shortstop. In the 3-hole, I got a healthy Vinny Pasquantino at first base. Salvador Perez will be catching. This is where it could get a little bit altered. I have Michael Massey in the 5-hole, and he's DHing. This is maybe the first part in the lineup. I'm going, is Michael Massey really going to be the 5-hole hitter for the Royals? To me, it's more so about righty-lefty, righty-lefty. You don't want to have a string of 3 straight hitters who are all righties or all 3 lefties. And Michael Massey coming after Salvador Perez, it works out for the lineup that way. But if there is another bat brought in, I could see Michael Massey moving down a little bit more in the order, mainly because I don't like the pressure it puts on Michael Massey in the 5-hole. That's a run producer spot. I do not envision Michael Massey as a run producer for this team. I would like for him to be that guy at the bottom of the order that gives them a little bit more pop, a little bit more consistency. But where things stand right now, I'm going to go with Michael Massey at the 5-hole and DHing. In the 6-hole, I'm going Hunter Renfroe in right field. Look, until they bring in another outfield bat, that's another guy that makes sense to place right behind a lefty. He's got the power. He's more of a run producer than Michael Massey, at least in his big league career. But I don't want to hit Salvador Perez and then have a righty right behind him and Hunter Renfroe. And Matt Quatraro constructed the lineup a few times like this in 2024, where you went Massey and Renfroe or Perez, Massey and Renfroe to get that mixing and matching a little bit. So I've got him in right field. In the 7-hole, I got MJ Melendez in left field. In the 8-hole, I got Maikel Garcia at third. And in the 9-hole, center field, Kyle Isbell. That's the opening day starting lineup I have right now. A new bat coming into this lineup, I believe, immediately gets penciled in one of those 3 outfield spots. Who knows who they've got their eye on? I believe they are trying to make some things work. It may not be as simple as let's just settle on a free agent bat, because it seems a little bit foolish just to throw money at somebody because you need to throw money at somebody. The Royals might feel like the upside of Melendez, Hunter Renfroe staying healthy, is a better option than spending money on Mark Canha or Alex Verdugo or Adam Duvall. I don't know their exact answer right now, but to me, this would be the 1 through 9 if there's no more moves to be made. Then I get to the bench. I got Kevin Biggio as the super utility man. I got Joey Wiemer as one of the outfielders. Freddie Fermin is the catcher, and Dairon Blanco in the outfield. So you have Blanco, his ability to swipe bases. You've got Joey Wiemer. Feels like the Royals are pretty high on Joey Wiemer to showcase a little bit more than what he was able to between Milwaukee and Cincinnati last year. I like the overall makeup. We discussed him a little bit in yesterday's episode. 6'4", 230, has the power, has the speed, has the range. If it's all put together, there's a world where Joey Wiemer is a starting outfielder for the Royals. If MJ Melendez starts struggling, or Hunter Renfroe's not healthier, or in center field if Kyle Isbell really regresses both at the plate and then maybe takes a few steps back defensively, there is a door that could be opened for Joey Wiemer. So I have him on the bench as well. Biggio, to me, could be replaced with Nick Loftin in camp if Loftin has a better camp. Again, Kevin Biggio's on the outside looking in because he's a minor league deal guy. He's a spring training invite, not on the 40-man roster. So he would have to play his ass off to get a spot in Kansas City. But Kevin Biggio is somebody that when you make a move like that, they envision a bounce-back type scenario. And it's been a few years since Kevin Biggio has been a successful big leaguer. And really outside of his first year, it's been a struggle for him. But the Royals are going to have to answer the question of who gives us more potential, who gives us more upside. Is it Kevin Biggio? Is it Nick Loftin? Is it Nelson Velasquez? Is it Drew Waters? Is it Nick Pratto? With Kevin Biggio, I could see him having a good camp. Now, Nick Loftin might be a better option, but even when you're looking at numbers at the big league level, Nick Loftin hasn't done it just yet. Kevin Biggio has done it. It's just been a while since he has. That'll be a very interesting position battle to sort through in camp, but those are the four guys I have off the bench. My rotation goes Cole Reagan, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, Michael Lorenzen, Chris Bubich. No surprises there. We'll get into the injury report that Annie Rogers and Jaylon Thompson gave earlier today in surprise. It almost feels like a foregone conclusion that Chris Bubich is going to be the number 5 starter because of some injuries that have occurred in the rotation and both in the bullpen. And when I say that, not with the regular guys in the rotation, I'm hinting at Alec Marsh and James McArthur. Out of the bullpen, I got Daniel Lynch. They loved what he did in long relief. Feels like he can stick there after a healthy camp. Sam Long, another big piece of that bullpen. Angel Serpa. Those are the 3 lefties to me. Lynch, Long, and Serpa. Then I get to 2 of the middle inning guys, the 7th inning guys. Carlos Hernandez, he's out of options with McArthur having a delayed start to camp. That gives Hernandez the nod over him, and especially with Marsh also having a delayed start to camp, that keeps the door open and an opportunity open for Carlos Hernandez. John Schreiber is going to be back in this bullpen, and then you got the 3, Hunter Harvey, Carlos Estevez, and Lucas Erceg to round out the bullpen. That's my 26-man roster. Where things stand right now could always have a little bit of a change if they bring in another bat or 2. But to me, this is what it's going to look like, assuming they don't make another move. Again, I'm still holding out hope that they make that one more move for an offensive threat, which would push out one of these bench bats. I'd imagine it'd be a Kevin Biggio if they were to move on from somebody, or Joey Weimer would start the year in AAA. But this feels like a safe bet, barring maybe one change or 2. What's your opening day roster projection? Who do you have in the starting 9? Who's in your rotation? And maybe more importantly, who's in that bullpen? Was there anybody you disagreed with? Let us know in the YouTube comments below. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's get to that injury news that was reported by Annie Rogers of MLB.com and Jaylon Thompson of the KC Star. They're going to be doing great coverage all month long down in Surprise. Already some eye-opening things happening in Arizona. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of our newer sponsors in Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better-for-you unsaturated fats to help you keep you feeling fuller longer. Get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. A really good snack. If you're just trying to stay full throughout the day, maybe you need that snack to bridge you from lunch to dinner, Wonderful Pistachios is the way to go. I've already got myself a pack. Very satisfying and very tasty if you do like pistachios. So Wonderful Pistachios, one of our newest sponsors here on the podcast. Some news that came out of Surprise earlier this morning. Pitchers and catchers were reporting. Matt Quatrero was able to meet with the media for those who were down there, 2 of them being Annie Rogers, who covers the team for MLB.com, and Jaylon Thompson, who does it for the KC Star. But the news that came out of Surprise was that Alec Marsh is going to have a delayed start to camp, and same thing will go for James McArthur, though these 2 situations are a little bit different. When you look at Alec Marsh, it appears it's just some tightness in the arm, where James McArthur, he did have surgery this offseason. So is this one of those things where Alec Marsh is dealing with some tightness? There were a few guys last year that dealt with tightness, and the delayed start to camp really set them back for the 2024 season. I remember Carlos Hernandez dealt with a little tightness in his arm, and he got a slow start to camp and then was down in AAA for the first portion of the season. John McMillan, that was maybe the biggest surprise, is he was one of the guys I was excited to see in camp, never was able to truly get going, had a few setbacks, never stayed healthy, numbers weren't good in AAA, and he ended up in Miami later that year. Actually pitched pretty well at the big league level, but he's been bouncing around from team to team this offseason. Those delayed starts can impact a lot of how you progress throughout the regular season. But when it comes to Alec Marsh, this is per Annie Rogers, it's shoulder tightness that he experienced this offseason. He's back on track throwing every day, but might be delayed slightly facing hitters. Manager Matt Quatrero said they're taking it day by day. Doesn't sound too concerning. In baseball, though, isn't it quite funny that when we hear something like tightness and, we're taking it day by day, sometimes those things linger. It didn't seem like Matt Quatrero was too concerned with an injury like this, and I'm not even going to call it an injury. Let's call it a setback, just a delayed start for Alec Marsh. But with that number 5 spot up for grabs and Chris Bubic being somebody that's going for that spot, it's already not a great start for Alec Marsh because you want to hit the ground running. You want to prove why you are this team's starter and not Chris Bubic, and Bubic is going to have to go back to the bullpen. But now, I don't see a world in which Chris Bubic loses this spot. If he stays healthy and he's got the swing and miss working in Surprise, I'd imagine he's going to be in the rotation. As we brought up in my roster projection, he's who I have as the number 5 starter for Kansas City. The other injury news involves James McArthur, of course, and he had right elbow surgery this offseason and had 2 screws put in to stabilize a fracture. He's just beginning his throwing program / progression, so he will be delayed into camp. That seems a little bit more serious than Alec Marsh. That's not a shocking statement by any means. We're talking about shoulder tightness, and we're talking about recovery from a elbow surgery that put 2 screws into the elbow to deal with a fracture. It wouldn't surprise me if that is the exact reason why we saw James McArthur tail off a little bit toward the end of the season, just dealing with something that was uncomfortable. But it brings me back to the roster projection a little bit and opening the door for somebody else. James McArthur, to me, was already on the outside looking in, not only with the poor numbers in the second half, but the bullpen got a lot stronger. And the bullpen has a lot more proven guys out there. And his role was in the back end of the bullpen, but the Royals have their wagon hitched to Hunter Harvey, to Carlos Estevez, and to Lucas Erceg. If you wanted to move into the middle portion of the bullpen, well, Carlos Hernandez is out of options, and John Schreiber's not going anywhere. And for the lefties, Daniel Lynch feels like the long reliever. Sam Long and Angel Serpa seem like mainstays as well for the bullpen. There's not much room for James McArthur, so he was already on the outside looking in my opinion. But when it comes to Alec Marsh, this is when it gets a little bit more complicated. Because if Alec Marsh has a delayed start, and let's say that delayed start bleeds into the final weeks of February, well, then he's already a few weeks behind. And what has Carlos Hernandez been able to do? Because if Chris Bubic makes the roster as the number 5 starter, that would then move Alec Marsh to the bullpen. And if you want to make room for Alec Marsh in the bullpen, who's the odd man out? Would it be Carlos Hernandez? Well, now you got to DFA Carlos Hernandez because you can't stash him away at the minor leagues. You could look into trading him. I'm sure a guy with a triple-digit fastball would have some trade value, but it also brings up the question, are you more interested in trading somebody like Alec Marsh to acquire a middle-of-the-order bat? So these things are all going to be sorted through over the next few weeks and really the next month and a half over spring training. But it's never good news to hear about setbacks and guys having delayed starts going into camp, because you should hope that they're strolling into Surprise 100% healthy. It's just not always going to be that way. I mean, these guys have been working out in the offseason. You can have a setback there. Pitchers, they're still throwing. They're still getting work in. That's where arm tightness can happen. That's where shoulder tightness can. You got to deal with the surgery and slowly building back up. And I'm still pretty high on James McArthur and what he can bring to this bullpen. Think that maybe the shoulder or the elbow surgery, I'm getting the shoulder tightness and the elbow surgery mixed up, but the elbow surgery could bring him back stronger than ever. And maybe with a good run at the minor league level, once he gets built back up and gets that confidence there, he can be a weapon for your bullpen. Because we all know that the bullpen they begin the season with, it's not going to be the bullpen they have in September. Everybody's going to get an opportunity to showcase themselves a little bit, whether that be a doubleheader, whether that be somebody getting injured, whether that be getting sent down to the minors because you're struggling. there are going to be multiple guys that get their chance in the bullpen. You hope that's not the case where you're running through 25, 30, 35 arms in the first couple months of the season. Sometimes you get bad luck, though. And that's why you want to have a stocked bullpen and depth behind them in case you do have that bad luck early on in the season. James McArthur's not somebody you should be writing off. Alec Marsh, the same exact thing. You can root for somebody to make the team and play in a certain spot or fill some spot in the rotation or in the bullpen. But keep in mind, you still need some of these other guys to prove that they are valuable depth. And James McArthur and Alec Marsh are both guys that have valuable depth. Where they would be placed, where they would be penciled in, that's a question for another episode. That's a question for another day. But there is upside to both of those guys. And to hear that they have a little bit of a delayed start, James McArthur more so than Alec Marsh, that's going to be difficult to then get worked back into all the routines and all the practices and deal with some of the guys that have already been practicing at a normal level now for a handful of weeks. Hopefully for Marsh, it's just a day or two or a couple days, maybe 1 week tops, that he's delayed throwing to live hitters. For McArthur, could be a little bit longer than that, but hopefully it's not for the entire camp or the majority of camp, so he would be set back so far to begin the season. But we'll see what happens toward the end of camp, where these two guys are at. But as of right now, per Andy Rogers, Jaylon Thompson, they're going to have a little bit delayed start to spring training. Okay, we're going to move on to our final segment. When we come back, let's go back to that bullpen, especially the back end of the bullpen. Lucas Erceg, how good can he be for the Royals? Are we talking best closer in baseball? Are we talking an all-star? Are we talking just as good as he was last year? Or should we expect some regression? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Let's dive into this bullpen, mainly the back end of the bullpen with Hunter Harvey, Carlos Estevez, and Lucas Erceg. We should all be aware of the fact by now that there's not going to be one specific closer. There will be somebody they go to more often than not, and they will build the 6th, 7th, and 8th inning tailored for this guy in the 9th, but there won't be somebody that has 45 saves or 50 saves because that's the only guy they go to in the 9th inning. The back three in this bullpen have that upside to be a really impressive group for the Royals in 2025. It really does come down to somebody like Hunter Harvey if he can recapture what he did in 2023 and 2024. But building that bullpen to get Lucas Erceg the ball in the 9th is going to be the first course of action, in my opinion. I think he's going to get the first crack at it, the first opportunity to take the ball in the 9th, and that's the way Matt Quatraro is going to work it. There will also be some games in April and May where Carlos Estevez is going to get the ball in the 9th, and who knows, maybe there's going to come a time where Hunter Harvey gets the ball in the 9th because you had to go to Lucas Erceg in the 6th inning in a crucial moment, and then Carlos Estevez had to come in the 7th or the 8th inning to get a couple of outs. Those are all scenarios that could be possibilities for the Royals in 2025. This question is going to come back to, what is the absolute ceiling for Lucas Erceg? In my opinion, the best pitcher in the bullpen, maybe one of the more underrated bullpen arms in the entire American League. If I were to go one step further, maybe he's one of the most underrated pitchers coming out of the bullpen in all of baseball. The stuff is there. We know all about the stuff. We know the clutch gene is there. We saw that in the postseason. Just what role, though, will he be put into, and how does that affect his value? For instance, if he's the fireman, we see him in an Andrew Miller type role where all season long, he's pitching in the 6th, he's pitching in the 8th, the 7th, the 9th, doesn't really get nailed down to one specific inning, where a lot of other guys, you might see them always in the 7th or always in the 8th, something like that. With Erceg, his best value is pitching in more of a fireman's role. It brings me to another part, though, where if you are a fireman, it does make it a little bit more difficult for you to get to an all-star game because you're not really penciled into a closer's role. You're not penciled into the setup role, and there's going to be a lot of great eighth inning and ninth inning guys in 2025. Erceg can be one of those guys. He can be one of the better setup/closer pitchers in all of baseball. But if he is a fireman, it does hurt his value a little bit for all-star votes. Maybe you care about that. Maybe you don't. I'm simply just pointing it out. But for the Royals, this does seem like a guy who, when the game is on the line, no matter where it is, he's going to get the ball. And for Matt Quatraro, I think he likes that card in his hand. He likes to have that in his back pocket. And now that you have a Carlos Estevez and a Hunter Harvey, John Schreiber, and Angel Serpa, a Carlos Hernandez when he's going well, a Daniel Lynch when he's going well, and you have those guys in your deck as well, it makes things easier on you. This was something that got criticized a lot in 2024 with how Matt Quatraro handled the bullpen. But when you don't have a lot of stable arms back there, it's incredibly difficult to deal with a fractured bullpen, to deal with a bullpen that can't get a lot of swing and miss, to deal with a bullpen that has little to no power. Stephen Vogt won Manager of the Year over Matt Quatraro, having the best bullpen in all of baseball. Ned Yost, who was just brought back to the organization, we talked about him. He is somebody that had the benefit of having one of the top bullpens we've ever seen in all of baseball. So when you have that, it makes you look like a genius. Going to this guy in the sixth inning and saving another for the seventh or the eighth, because those guys can get outs at a very high level. Those guys are going to come in and do their job. Last year, early on, it was a dart throw. You never knew what you were going to get from Will Smith, from Chris Stratton, from James MacArthur, from Serpa before he had that stretch in September. Didn't know what you were going to get from a handful of guys. Nick Anderson early on in the season. Now there's that stability. And for Erceg, if they build that bullpen around him, there's a really good chance he's one of the all-star representatives for the Royals, because that stuff is so electric. That stuff is so elite. And we had the pleasure of seeing him on the biggest of stages in the postseason, in one-run games, being able to go up against top lineups and do his job. You also want to be sure that he's healthy come postseason time if you're lucky enough to make it. A fireman's role could hurt those chances where he's throwing nearly every night. You don't want that to happen, and the Royals aren't going to run him to the ground in the same way the Nationals ran Hunter Harvey in the ground before they dealt him to Kansas City. You want to be sure that he's built up, is fresh every single time he takes the mound. That's not always going to be the case, but you know, with some relievers out there, they like throwing on back-to-back days. Other guys like to throw with a few days rest in between. But for Erceg, how good can he be? He can be an all-star level closer. He might not get the save totals that Greg Holland did. You could also see him, though, like a Wade Davis type for the bullpen, where he could get somewhere between 25 and 30, maybe 35 saves, if that is the route they go to, where Estevez is going to be the eighth inning guy, or maybe Hunter Harvey's the eighth inning guy and Estevez is the seventh inning guy, and it's all pointed towards Lucas Erceg. He'll have that chance. But even if he doesn't, if it is a different closer and kind of a closer by committee, he can be maybe more so recognized as one of the better arms coming out of the bullpen in all of baseball, even though he doesn't really have a defined role in Kansas City's bullpen. But all-star, that is on the table. Being closer of the year, save man of the year, if you will, that might be a bit of a stretch because of some of the names they have out there. My vote's still going to go to Mason Miller, wherever he does end up. Maybe it's going to be in Sacramento the entire year. Maybe he gets dealt at the deadline. But for Erceg, I expect the national media to really start recognizing him, especially if the Royals are winning a lot of baseball games. Okay, that's going to do it for us on Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to go into a little bit more of what to expect this coming weekend. We head down to surprise some guys we may be interviewing, and maybe more talk on the storylines going into spring training and once the games start happening. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.